Welcome back to Pages of Purpose. Today we're diving into Chapter 1 of Rich Dad, Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki. This is the book that's transformed how millions think about money, work, and the path to financial freedom. So, if you've ever wondered what's holding you back from financial independence, this is the video for you. Chapter 1 introduces us to a young Robert Kiyosaki and the two father figures who would shape his entire outlook on wealth. Imagine being a kid and realizing you're hearing completely different life advice from two people you respect deeply. That's what happened to Robert, and he calls them his rich dad and poor dad. Now, here's the twist. Robert's real dad, the one with the stable job and a high level of education, is actually his poor dad. He's a smart, hardworking man, but his view on money is what Robert would later consider limiting. In contrast, his rich dad didn't even finish school. Yet he went on to build a successful business empire. The different mindsets. Rich dad and poor dad didn't just have different jobs. They had entirely different mindsets. And this is one of the book's biggest lessons. Your mindset about money can shape your entire life. Poor dad followed what many of us have been taught: get a good education, find a secure job, and work hard for a stable future. But rich dad's philosophy? He believed in making money work for you. He was all about assets, investments, and most importantly, understanding how money actually works. Here's a powerful quote from Chapter 1. The poor and the middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. Let that sink in. It's a huge mental shift, right? Instead of running on the hamster wheel, grinding every day just to pay bills, imagine building a life where your money grows even while you sleep. The conflict. Young Robert's dilemma. For young Robert, this was confusing. His own dad, poor dad, kept telling him to study hard and get a secure job. But rich dad was saying, don't rely on a paycheck. Build assets, invest in things that increase in value over time. So, what does a kid do with two conflicting philosophies like this? This is where Robert began to question everything he'd been taught about financial success. Mindset shifts, I can't afford it, versus how can I afford it? One of the first shifts rich dad taught Robert was in language. While poor dad would often say, I can't afford it, rich dad taught him to ask, how can I afford it? Now, this might sound simple, but think about it. By asking, how can I afford it? You start to open your mind to possibilities and opportunities. You're no longer shutting down the idea, you're engaging with it. Learning by doing, the value of experience. Rich dad also believed that the best way to learn was by doing. Instead of taking financial advice from those who were simply educated, he suggested learning from people who were financially successful themselves. So he set up a little job for Robert and his friend Mike at his store. They weren't paid much, but the goal was to get them thinking about how to create opportunities for themselves. Robert wasn't just working, he was learning the foundations of business and entrepreneurship. Emotionally engaging moment. The big realization. One day, Robert asked Rich Dad, why don't you pay me more? And that's when Rich Dad shared a hard truth, one that's difficult for a lot of us to hear. He explained that if you work solely for money, you end up becoming a slave to it. His words made Robert realize that it's not just about getting a paycheck, it's about building wealth that isn't dependent on your physical labor. Building assets, the path to financial independence. Rich Dad emphasized one main principle: assets create wealth. He encouraged Robert to invest in things like real estate, stocks, or even building a business, things that would bring in income long after the work was done. This concept of assets versus liabilities is at the heart of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. Rich Dad taught Robert that an asset is something that puts money in your pocket, while a liability is something that takes money out. The final lesson of Chapter 1, breaking free from financial limitation. The main takeaway from Chapter 1 is a big one. Freedom comes from changing your mindset about money. It's not about working harder at a job. It's about thinking like Rich Dad and asking yourself how you can make your money work for you. Robert's journey is just beginning, but this chapter is a reminder that each of us has a choice. We can follow the traditional path, or we can think differently, challenge norms, and aim for true financial independence. Thanks for joining me on this journey through Chapter 1 of Rich Dad, Poor Dad. If this chapter resonated with you, or if it made you think differently about money, drop a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Remember to subscribe for more chapter breakdowns and financial wisdom that can set you on the path to financial freedom.